Once a person has decided to sit for their first CFA exam, they could realistically spend months and months, even before they begin studying, in learning about the program, the different ways that you could study for the program, how the tests work, how the 3 levels work, and all the background information that could potentially prepare them for their studies. I spent a lot of time on forums and some on YouTube developing my own study plan and really mentally preparing myself before I began studying for CFA Level 1, but there were still some things I missed. So here are 7 things that I wish I would have known before I started off my journey in the CFA program. Number 1 is that studying becomes an addiction. Maybe this is a bad or good thing depending on how you look at it. For me, I knew exactly how much time I was going to spend studying because, like I mentioned, I put together an entire study schedule that laid out what I would do every day from the beginning of December till the first Saturday in June for the exam. But what I wasn't prepared for is how much I would feel the need to study every day. This could differ a little bit depending on your schedule. I know a lot of people who don't study at all during weekdays and just put in like 8 or 10 or 12-hour days on Saturdays and Sundays, and that's fine too. That'll get you the 300 hours you need. I imagine in that schedule, you'd be a little less prone to this feeling of addiction that I'm describing relative to those of us who studied every single day. Even after just the first couple months, after getting into some of the practice quizzes, for me that was through Wiley's practice quiz system, and seeing a lot of those inevitably low scores and maybe doing some blue box examples and EOC questions and seeing some low scores there, you're going to develop this need to do better and better. Of course, the only surefire way to get yourself to be scoring higher on these practice quizzes is by studying more. A lot of people have reported developing this feeling internally where it's like anything you're doing other than studying almost feels like you're wasting time. You have this burn inside of you that's telling you need to go be studying more. Sometimes for me, this turned into studying really late into the night, even after I had put in my 3 hours because maybe I scored poorly on a practice quiz there and I wanted to review everything I just studied and did another hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. A few times I would wake up in the middle of the night, not necessarily because I was like dreaming about studying, but just for whatever random reason a person wakes up in the night. But then a single thought would cross my mind about what I studied that day or what I'm going to be studying tomorrow or when I'm going to start the next unit or whatever, and then my brain would turn on and I could not close my eyes. I certainly couldn't calm my mind down at that point, and I would just have to get up and go start studying in the middle of the night. And also similar to addiction, after a really good study session, you'd have this great sense of accomplishment, which again may be a good or bad thing, but it just felt so good, especially if it was in a section that you'd been struggling for a certain period of time. After you'd have a great session where you actually learn the material, do some practice questions, get the answers right, and you know you have it down. That's such a high feeling that comes from some of these study sessions. You will literally notice yourself starting to chase that high. And again, it's kind of an addictive thing. The second one is that your participation in the CFA program can sometimes be more difficult for those people really close to you in your life than it is for you yourself. That might sound crazy to say because of course you are the one sacrificing your own time and years of your life in pursuit of something, but you got to think about the day-to-day reality of what studying that much means. You're going to be totally occupied, not distracted whatsoever, and you're going to really grind out those study sessions. So you're not going to be bored during those. You might hate your life, but you're not going to be bored. And you're also going to have this deep sense of meaning. And sometimes it's really deep, like you're not going to really notice it, but there is this sense of meaning or striving towards an achievement of something really significant that comes along with studying and putting in that much time for these exams. Now, because of the amount of time you're spending doing this, other people in your life are just going to end up feeling neglected. Even if you told them before starting off in the CFA program, they may just not understand the level of commitment required or the magnitude of what it is that you're working on and how significant it can be for you and your career and how much effort and time and focus you're going to put towards this thing. That could come as a surprise to someone who still hopes to be spending a good amount of time with you. For a significant other or your spouse, especially either of those if you're living with them, they can feel extremely bored. I know that was certainly the case for my wife, and just really wish that they had you around. There's a reason they picked you. There's a reason they're with you. They too are going to have to sacrifice a lot of you to have you be able to participate in this thing. And that can be a big change for a lot of people. The next one's probably the most difficult for me personally, just because I'm not a big fan of the whole status complex that exists in psychology and interpersonal working relationships. But it's that some people that don't have the CFA charter, and we're talking about people in the investment industry, are going to feel lesser than you once you have the CFA charter, and it's going to change the dynamic a little bit. I really didn't expect this one, but it just happens more than you would think. Senior people, either senior to you in terms of their rank and position or just their age, will give you like qualifying statements before sharing any opinions with you and say things like, well, I know I'm not the CFA here, or I know I'm not the expert here, but I was trained by XYZ person, or I did do this type of training, or I've been doing this for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and so this is what we've always been taught, this is what we were trained, whatever. Especially in an instance where there's any disagreement around a certain situation, a lot of people will feel the need to start providing you with their credentials before they share their opinions with you, or their dissenting opinions. It's totally unnecessary, but that's kind of some of the power of the CFA charter, is just the status that it carries. I've noticed some advisors who work in the firm where I'm at that previously would talk shop with me and throw around ideas about different types of products or investment strategies they're trying out with clients or thinking about using with clients. They'll just stop doing that, and they really won't approach me about those things at all. I feel like it has something to do with this difference in status that they now perceive. And you're just gonna have to trust me, I am not someone with a big ego. I hate when people belittle people, put other people down just because of some experience or educational background that they have. I don't do any of that type of stuff. So I imagine for someone who does and really likes to sit on their high horse and talk about their accomplishments and how smart they are and all that type of stuff, could even rub people the wrong way further and create some really sour relationships. Number 4 is that the ethical requirements that come along with being a CFA candidate or charter holder will start to haunt you. In a good way, though. It has just seemed to me that certain ethical dilemmas come up in my career more and more often than I would have guessed when I was studying for the ethics material in the CFA exams going, yeah, okay, CFA Institute, when am I ever going to need this? Some of that stuff really does apply very often in practice, so it's very valuable to have that training. It also becomes weird when you're not sure exactly what you need to do. One example that comes to mind all the time for me is a disclosure. I know this rule is applied in several of the ethical standards, but basically it's disclosure of conflicts of interest or disclosure in a case where there could be seen as a conflict of interest by a third party. Several things just come up where if you really play devil's advocate, you could go, yeah, an educated third party could potentially see one of these two options or my involvement in these two options as having a conflict of interest. Even if you yourself don't feel like there's any conflict of interest and you know you're doing what's best for the client, someone could potentially see a situation as having a conflict of interest. Because of that, I've ran into scenarios where I convince myself in my mind, yeah, someone could perceive this as being a conflict of interest, so I'll start to kind of disclose that to the client. Then I end up talking about something that doesn't even really exist or apply to them in that situation, but again, a third party might think it does, and then the conversation can get a little bit odd because they don't exactly understand why I'm bringing an unrelated type of investment product or something else up. And I'm like, just so you know that we have your best interest in mind. That could then spark the question in their mind, like, wait, why is my advisor giving me these disclosures? And then because I know that that type of thing can happen, sometimes I feel like I should avoid certain disclosures because maybe something really isn't much of a conflict of interest. Then you start to ask yourself, like, wait, am I purposely avoiding a conversation about a potential conflict of interest? So it just gets really weird. I just end up, number 1, doing what's best by the client. And then number 2, putting forth my best effort to decide if I think there's anything that should be disclosed there. And if the answer is yes, then I do. And if no, then I don't. Another example of these ethical gray areas could be in like performance presentation on a certain bond issuance where someone from your firm may have quoted the coupon, or certain different bonds have different maturities. So someone may have quoted a certain yield to maturity, but other bonds may have a higher or lower yield to maturity. Or someone could have went really aggressively low, I guess, and quoted the yield to worst. And then you're like, well, no, this is the realistic number. There are different numbers that can apply to certain, in this example, fixed income issuances. You want to be totally forthcoming and give the client all the information, but if you throw like 6 different numbers at them, they're going to be totally confused. Nothing will make sense. In some cases, my solution has been just to give the client the number that most matters to them and kind of tell them, like, for your municipal issuance, this is the yield to maturity that's going to apply. But then maybe the partner that they had originally talked about doing this deal with had given them different numbers. So then I'm kind of in trouble from the partner, like, hey, AJ, why'd you give them different quotes than I did? And I don't know exactly how the conversation went for them. Point is, there can be different ways to present material performance numbers and performance information. So you always want to do what's going to make sense for the client and your managing partners in the company, but also you want to disclose as much as you would have to. I don't know, it can just be questionable. Number 5 is my personal favorite thing to share here, and that is that you should look forward to exam day. If you're a competitive person, taking a CFA exam, in my opinion, is like an academic gauntlet. It is like one of the ultimate mental challenges that, especially if you're taking level 3, you may never get to experience again in your life. I know I probably won't. Maybe I shouldn't admit this, but in instances where people have asked, hey, what are some of the best days of your life? I'm married, I have a kid, and those are up there. But for whatever reason, one of the first or second or third days that always pops into my mind is some of the days down taking CFA exams at the testing center that I feel oh so familiar with, even though I've only been there 3 times in my life for the 3 exams. Of course, if you're not well prepared and you walk out of the exam room feeling like you failed, or if you've later figured out that you failed, that day would not have been a high point in your life. But if you are really well prepared, you don't even have to necessarily feel like you killed the exam. For level 2, I wasn't sure if I passed or failed, and I passed by an okay margin, slightly more than a small margin. But I still walked into and then throughout the course of the exam, and then left the exam center that day feeling like I was on top of the world. Because of the effort and energy that goes into preparation for that day, getting to go in and put all that effort and energy to work really is an awesome feeling. I know this has probably changed a bit with the new computer-based testing system and also more frequent testing allowed, but the general principle is still there. There are very few times in life, and many people on the earth will never experience this in life, where you maximize the utilization that you can get out of your brain in pursuit of some extremely high academic or mental achievement. And I'm not talking about college or university where someone crams for 2 days or maybe pulls an all-nighter studying for an exam really quick so that they can score an 86%. This is a significant portion of your life that you put in working on this stuff and studying this stuff to try to master it. That was the high point in my life in terms of mental capacity or brain utilization, and I probably won't ever get back to that point again. It's so cool to be at that level. My point is, once you are at that point, when you're going in on exam day to take the test, I know you're going to be nervous and worried and all that, but appreciate it, because there are very few days in your life where you'll be at that level of mental preparedness. Number 6 is how often you're going to need to explain to other people what the CFA charter is. I knew that there are a lot of people who didn't know what the CFA charter was, and it's kind of helpful that the Institute gives you a nice little description to go by when telling people what it is, but man, there is almost nobody who knows what the CFA is. Even people within the finance industry who think they know what it is, unless they've studied for and sat for level 1, they aren't going to understand what a beast this program really can be. The 2 partners at my firm who originally had asked me to start along in the CFA program had very little idea about what it was. They just knew that it was kind of considered the gold standard. They wanted people in the firm to have that, so they recommended to me that I do it. It just really feels like the Institute does not do nearly enough in terms of education to the public on what the CFA charter is, not even within the finance field, and certainly not within the general public. I don't think I've ever talked to a client or prospect who has ever even heard of the CFA designation. Not like they've heard of it like the CPA, but they don't really know what it's about. They've never even heard of it. I can't think of a single instance in which someone has heard of it. The real issue that comes with this, though, is that you're going to get tired of having to explain it to people. You're going to feel like you're talking about it all the time. And this can be uncomfortable because it's almost always going to sound like you're bragging. It's hard to convey the extent of the CFA exams and the entire program and still sound humble. It's like having to tell someone that you're a good mountain climber and so proceeding to tell them that you climb Mount Everest or something. They're gonna be like, oh, wow, you know. In my opinion, you have to do it in a really delicate way to convey the information to them that you're extremely qualified without sounding like a jerk who's full of themselves. And finally, number 7 is that I was not expected for the amount of women that would be throwing themselves at me now. I know for some people this isn't an issue, but I have a wife, and before she was a preschool teacher, she was an MMA fighter. So whenever we're out on a date at like Taco Bell or McDonald's or something, and I'm wearing my CFA pin, which I don't leave the house without, whenever women see that, they just like start going crazy. And I'm like an extremely nice guy, so for me it's just, hey ma'am, could you please give me my space? I'm not all that interested, thank you though. My wife, on the other hand, will really lose it. Her preferred method of takedown during her MMA days was the armbar, so I've seen her like jump over the counter at a McDonald's and grab someone's arm and then like bend their whole arm back. Then you got like wrist popping out, elbow popping out, shoulder. It's, you know, it's really bad. And then she's like reaching around with her other hand, just punched him in the face. So I really can't tell now if the way I'm making this joke is going to be perceived in a very humorous way. So I'm just going to cut it off here. If you've gotten to this point in the video, it means you watched the whole thing, and I very much appreciate that. If you want to support me on any third-party websites, check for my links in the description down below. If you could also like this video and subscribe to the channel. Both of those things help me out very much too. And as always, thanks for watching.